Chapter 6. I was sitting on a lonely Himalayan footpath one day when a fearsome tribe of perhaps 20 men approached. They were holding iron tridents crowned with human skulls, and each held their trident like a processional flag. Heavy coils of matted hair were piled on their heads, and their knotted beards swung in rhythm to their march. From their dreadlocks to their bare feet, a thick covering of ashes covered their flesh, and strands of rudraksha beads hung from their necks. On their foreheads, they smeared the three-line symbol of Shiva, and around their waists they wrapped iron chains draped with bright red loincloths to cover their groins. Except for the loincloths, they were naked, even in the biting cold. Some remained naked completely. These were the Naga Babas, avowed to celibacy for life. The Nagas often performed tantric methods to kill sexual desire or mystically transform it into psychic powers. Ignoring social conventions, many roam naked as a discipline. Their unshorn hair was but one act of diverting attention away from the body completely, a form of renunciation. The Nagababa sect has existed since prehistoric past, and some Naga sects have fought as armies against the Mughal and British conquerors, Buddhists, and even other sects of Hindus. My mind burned with eagerness to understand why anyone would choose such a severe life. I mustered my courage and asked to travel with them. One among them who spoke English asked the others. They displayed their approval by raising their tridents high above their heads, shouting Jai Shankar, and dragging me by the arm into their entourage. I was quickly accepted as a brother. After walking many miles, we stopped on the bank of a river to set up camp, where a priest named the Dhuni Baba gathered wood and lit a sacred fire. All the Naga Babas sat around it. I, too, approached the fire to sit among them. A horrifying shriek jolted my wits. Turning, I saw Dhuni Baba screaming in rage, bolting toward me with his trident raised over his head. His eyes blazed red, lips quivered, and limbs trembled as he waved the trident over my head. Shouting curses, the assembly of Nagas unleashed furious stares at me. I was utterly bewildered. What had I done? Was my life to end by the trident of the Naga Babas? I prayed. One of the Babas, his face contorted with disgust, pointed to my rubber sandals. I yanked them off and hurled them far into the jungle. The Nagas stared. Everything was still as I held my breath. The Nagas erupted into hearty laughter and welcomed me to sit among them. As the tension broke, I exhaled and drew in a breath of mountain air, taking my seat on the cold ground, but still quite bewildered. The one Naga who spoke some English explained, "The sacred fire is our temple. No shoes allowed." Actually, we are not angry. This is our method to teach you a lesson you will never forget. Dhuni Baba has given you much kindness today. I solemnly promised that I would never forget this lesson. Dhuni Baba grinned. In the center of the sacrificial fire, they planted an upright trident representing Shiva. Then, chanting mantras, they offered oblations of clarified butter, and at a certain point in the ceremony, presented a clay pipe called a chilam before the altar. Still chanting mantras, they ceremoniously filled the chilam with a type of marijuana called ganja and gave the first honors to a senior Naga. He reverentially held the chillum to his forehead and chanted incantations before puffing it. Then they passed the pipe around the fire, each Naga chanting mantras before smoking. When it was passed to me, I hesitated. My mind flashed back to that smoke-filled cellar in Kandahar, Afghanistan, where I made a promise before the Lord. As respectfully as I could, I declined. A hush fell over the Nagas. They stared at me with discontent and then erupted into shouts of Mahaprasad, Mahaprasad, Shankar Mahaprasad. The English-speaking Naga translated, "This is Shiva's mercy. You must honor it with us. It will help you to meditate on the infinite. If you refuse, it is a punishable offense." The rest of them stared at me like a vengeful mob. "I vowed to never take intoxicants," I said softly. He translated my words to the Nagas, and they fell into an eerie silence. Then one of them stood up to gather wood and fed it into the sacred fire. Pausing, he stared at me and shook his head in disapproval. My head swirled. Is this fire going to be my funeral pyre? Suddenly, all the Nagas smiled at me. Duni Baba affectionately rubbed my head and laughed. They honored my vow to abstain from ganja. To my relief, an iron pot was placed on the fire for cooking dinner. When the cooking of the rice and dal was done, Duni Baba offered a part of it into the fire while chanting mantras. The remainder became the sanctified food called prasad and was served to the assembled Nagas. That night we all slept near the fire, and in the morning, after bathing in the chilly river, I watched as they smeared their bodies with the ashes of the sacred fire, which they did whenever crematorium ashes were not close by. Perhaps because of the bitter cold, the fire was the most popular place to be. Some of them smoked ganja, while other Nagas meditated or chanted mantras on their Rudraksha beads. Then before my eyes, an elder Naga, sitting motionless in the lotus posture, slowly levitated about a foot above the ground. Another Baba near the fire did the same. I pinched myself to be sure I wasn't dreaming. No, I was awake, just in another world, a world of rough and rowdy mendicants, aloof to everything but their own reality. Everywhere there are outlaws who break the law, and here, retreating in their forest hideout, are these Naga Babas who effortlessly break the laws of gravity. They are so much in harmony with the natural laws that they are free to play with them as they like. While the two Nagas floated in the air, I looked around to see the others' reaction. The rest of the Nagas paid no attention. Levitating was common practice to them. The next morning we received a summons from the Naga tribe's guru. We traveled to the forest where, I was told, their guru was performing his severe yogic meditation while sitting for days in the lotus posture without movement, food, or water. As we strode through the bushes, the English-speaking Naga, who had become my translator, enlightened me about their leader. He abandoned his home at the age of 12 to become a Naga Baba. Strict in yogic discipline, he never indulges in smoking ganja or any intoxication like many of us. Nor does he engage in any sensual pleasure. Meditating almost constantly, he has attained supernatural powers that are a wonder to see. He seldom speaks, but when he does, everybody listens. It took 6 hours until we came to a clearing in the forest where the Naga's guru presided. His enormous body was folded in the lotus posture, and his form pulsated with power. Perhaps in his 70s, his gray matted hair extended down his back and stretched several feet on the ground. Naked and covered with a thick layer of ashes, his eyes were shut in meditation. One Naga Baba beat a primitive kettle drum with a tree branch, while another blew a buffalo horn to rouse the guru and announce our arrival. The guru slowly opened his eyes. Without blinking, he stared at me. I shivered. All the Nagas gathered around to witness the event. There was pin-drop silence. A deep growling voice emerged from the guru's mouth as he bellowed out, "Why waste your life? You become Naga." Smashing his fist against his massive bare chest, he boomed out, "Naga will conquer illusion. Naga is man." Aiming his finger into my face, he slowly shook his head and blasted, "You become Naga Baba. Now. Not tomorrow. Now." The guru's stare sizzled right through me. Feeling like a tiny mouse in the presence of a roaring lion, I wondered if his mere glance would reduce me to ashes. He waited for my answer, as did they all. What should I say? What was to come? I had to follow my heart. I stood in silence. Long seconds passed. The Naga Guru seemed to be staring right into my mind. In that silence, I now felt confident that he would understand me, would understand that while I appreciated his path, it was not my own. With a gaze of acknowledgement, he raised his thick, powerful hand, and closing his eyes in meditation, he offered me his blessing. "Yes, God will help you." The Naga Babas praised my good fortune and went back to their activities. Through yogic discipline, this Naga Guru radiated an unearthly power that invoked both awe and fear, and his determination seemed unshakable as the Himalayas. I was honored to meet him, but felt I had better move on. The next day I bowed to the leader, asking for blessings to carry on my pilgrimage. The Nagas raised their tridents and shouted their blessing, "Jai Shankar." Turning around, I walked alone through the forest path, barefoot. This particular sect of Naga Babas shared a rare camaraderie. Their loyalty to the sect and to each other was real and for life. Wherever they roamed, onlookers often shook with fear, for they were wild, rough, and lived severely. But in their own way, it was all in the search for God. I set out to visit Badrinath, high in the Himalayas. Traditionally, when a man was in the last stage of life, he would trek to Badrinath and never return. But it proved an impossible journey for me, as the paths were impassable due to snow and avalanches. Returning to Rishikesh, I found myself at one of the most prominent ashrams, Swargashram, where to my delight I was invited to a special feast for all sadhus. All the sadhus sat on the ground together in lines, one line facing another to honor the spiritual food or prasad that had been prepared for us. Watching how much these old sadhus could eat on such occasions, I was amazed and promptly followed suit. When we finished, we washed our hands, and many of us lay left side down on the ground, a traditional method for aiding digestion. After resting, I set out to explore the area. While meandering along a footpath, I met with some wealthy pilgrims who were fascinated to see a Western boy living among the sadhus. We spent the rest of the afternoon conversing on a veranda. Toward early evening, a yogi, in his late 30s, begged for charity, but my hosts ignored him. Irate, he fixed his mind to teach them a good lesson. First, he stood on a chair and reached up to unscrew a glowing light bulb from its socket. Standing before the pilgrims, he crushed the hot bulb with his bare hand. When he opened his fist, he showed us how he had ground it into a fine powder. Amazingly, there was not a trace of blood or single cut in his hand. And this was only the beginning of his performance. He then poured all the fine glass powder into his mouth, and drinking a cup of Ganges water, swallowed it all. The wealthy pilgrims were astounded. Reaching into their pockets, they each gave him a generous donation and asked if he would show them more of his powers. For his next feat, the yogi went to a nearby construction site to claim a long pole of steel rebar. Covering one eye with a thick patch of cloth, he balanced one end of the metal pole on his eye socket and the other against a wall. Then he slowly walked forward toward the wall. The metal pole bent more and more with each step until he actually reached the wall. Bending the two ends of the pole together with his bare eye. Tossing the now U-shaped rod aside, he removed the cloth to reveal an eye that was bright red with irritation, but undamaged. I had seen so many of these powers among yogis, it had become quite ordinary to me. But the pilgrims now lavished more money on him, asking how he gained his powers. While massaging his eye with his palm, he explained, "For 20 years I lived with my guru in a Himalayan cave. Guruji taught me that I was using the powers he taught me for prestige and monetary gain. Rejecting me, he exiled me from the ashram and cursed me to go back into society." Dropping the people's money into his cloth pouch, he continued, "Now I am raising money to get married. Having been trained as a yogi, this is the only way I know to make a living." Although I had been learning from everyone, from Swami Rama, who altered his heartbeat and moved objects with his mind, to my energetic friend who materialized the Rudraksha bead, that such feats were not to be revered above simple devotion to God. It wasn't until this moment that I realized mystic powers were not necessarily spiritual at all. Those who were able to counteract the apparent laws of nature had naturally impressed me. So much of what I'd seen seemed miraculous. Now I saw that such feats, unconnected to a meaningful search for God, were truly insubstantial. I was looking for more. The Himalayas had given me much, but I did not yet know what form my worship would take, and sought to expose myself to the rich variety of worship in India as a whole. Promise of visiting Varanasi, a highly spiritual city praised in Indian literature, and learning more about Buddhism and its practitioners at Bodh Gaya, lured me to travel southeast into the plains. I was about to descend from the Himalayas, but I knew I would be back. These 4 months had seemed like a lifetime and had given me much to digest. Returning to my cherished rock in the Ganges, I listened to the river's song, There my Himalayan experiences flashed across the screen of my mind. There was the sadhu who instructed me to submerge my Western clothes in the river and granted me the robes of a mendicant. The jewels of wisdom I collected while watching the river, offering my harmonica into the Ganges and receiving her sweet song. Swami Chidananda's simplicity and wisdom, Maharishi's blessings in dreams, Tatwala Baba's absorption in meditation, the leper woman's blessing, Kailash Baba's fatherly kindness, Anandamayi Ma's motherly compassion, Bal Shiva Yogi's yogic powers, the Naga Baba's unique teaching techniques, and the lessons I learned from the rivers, mountains, trees, sky, and wild animals. As I bade farewell to the Himalayan mountains and all of the people there, it seemed as though I had been living in these forests for the better part of my life.